And with that, I think we'll get underway, and thank you all for coming. I'm the director, my name is Peter Froehlich. For those of you who don't know, haven't met me yet, I'm the director of scholarly publishing in the Purdue University Libraries. And my co-PI is Laurel Weldon, who's the director of the Purdue Policy Research Institute in Discovery Park. So we have a wonderful afternoon of speakers for you, all made possible by the generous grants from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and through co-sponsorship of the Libraries in Discovery Park. So thank you to our sponsors. And today really is both a capstone event for the last round of the Mellon Grant and a kickoff for the new round. It's serving both functions. And in the first grant that we wanted to highlight happened over the last few years. And here we wanted to pause to thank the authors and collaborators who partners on the first grant, including our Dean Mullins, Jim Mullins, and in Purdue Libraries, and Suresh Garamella, and others, who's not here, but he'll be joining us later this evening, and some of the other visionaries who really formed the idea that brought this project together. It was that idea that we're building on. They set us up, their leadership, their vision crafted this multi-unit Purdue initiative in the first round, and their leadership and guidance has brought us here today and set us up for success in the new round. So thank you very much, Jim Mullins.
Rosie.
And Rosie Clausen and all the co-PIs as well. So thank you very much. This next round is Breaking Through. That's the name of the grant that's beginning today. And again, the partners are gathered again. We got the band back together again for the new round. And we expect in this new round to fund 4 different projects. So the next one runs for the next 3 years, and later this afternoon we'll be telling you more about that. It's a unique approach that I think Laurel wanted to kick off and talk about a little bit.
So one of the things we wanted to emphasize, and you'll hear this is kind of the idea behind the structure of today's events, and indeed behind the call that we've put out and our kind of conceptualization of this whole project, is a model of high-impact interdisciplinary research that in some ways emerged from the first round of this project, which is one of the reasons we're so grateful to these people from the first round. And that really has devolved even further as we've conceptualized the second stage. And that is really a project that focuses on catalyzing the collaboration between STEM researchers and scholars in the humanities and social sciences and libraries on the one hand, but that also, so it's integrated in that sense, but it's also integrated in the sense that it brings in kind of thinking about communication, thinking about innovative modes of communication, thinking about policy relevance and connection to communities of interest right from the very beginning. So it's not like you do your research and then you sit around for a couple weeks thinking about policy implications. It's more like those questions and concerns and thinking about relevant communities and stakeholders are something that you start thinking about right from the very beginning. Similarly, you don't wait till you have your results and then think about how you're going to communicate findings. You're integrating communication and communicating about your scholarship and your project right from the very beginning. So this model of this is a model for enhancing this sort of high-impact research that focuses on innovative communication, innovative combinations of disciplines, an integrated model overall, and breaking through, right, to impact, pushing this research beyond the sort of just great research findings, which are important, but also to include the tremendous impact that's possible to get the full value of the discovery.
And we'll be going into it in a little more detail later this afternoon when we talk about the call for proposals. So an overview of the program today.
So as you'll see then, this is why we've structured this a little bit this way. So we started out with our first panel to provide us real insight into this model of research that we've just been talking about. We have experts on each of these dimensions of interdisciplinarity and communication and impact, and we are asking them to talk with you about today. We also, in our next panel, we'll have people talk about the lessons that they've learned from trying to develop collaboration between social sciences and humanities on the one side, STEM faculty, and then libraries faculty as well.
And then who participated in the first
round. Our second, after that, we'll move on to really developing this idea about driving impact through communication. And We'll have some, our featured speakers will be speaking to that question, and then we'll have some information and a question and answer on this call for proposals that we're disseminating today, and we have some copies of that call around for people if they want hard copies. Wrapping up with our reception and keynote with Roland Fryer this evening, who in some ways embodies this sort of model of high-impact interdisciplinary research that we've been talking about. Okay, so with that, I think we want to begin introducing our panel. Here we're doing the
It's our soft shoe. We had a soft shoe routine that we had planned, but we decided to cut that interest of time. So I have the honor of introducing our first panel. For the afternoon, focuses on innovative models for research and grand challenges, with emphasis in 3 specific areas, as Laurel mentioned: interdisciplinary nature of the research, communication, and impact. Moderating the panel is Tomás Díaz de la Rubia, who spoke to us earlier during lunch. And he's the chief scientist and executive director of Discovery Park, and is a widely recognized leader in interdisciplinary research in his own right. And then for our first panelist.
We're also pleased to introduce Arden Bement, who's the David A. Ross Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Nuclear Engineering right here at Purdue. And he was the inaugural director of the Global Policy Research Institute, which is now the Purdue Policy Research Institute. In his remarkable career, he has served in executive positions in government, industry, and academia. He is former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Advanced Technology, and he also served a 6-year term as the director of the NSF. Please join me in welcoming Arden Bement.
Thanks so much. And our second panelist is Barbara Kline Pope. Barbara is the Executive Director for Communications at the National Academies and Executive Director of the National Academies Press as well. And as an additional title, there's working on adding some more titles to Barbara currently, as I understand it. Is also publisher of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. She has really shaped, she's been a leader in our industry of scholarly communication for many years. She's really shaped online publishing for more than a decade. She's also a key proponent of targeted open access to increase dissemination and impact of research in the public sphere. She joined us for our October conference in the wrapping up of the last round and spoke about the science of scientific communication, and you can see that video online if you'd like to take a look at our website. It's on EPUBs and as well and through our Scholarly Publishing Center in the libraries. And we are grateful to have her here with us again today. So please join me in welcoming Barbara Kline Pope.
So our third panelist, Nick Haan, joins us today via Skype. So he'll be the disembodied voice that you hear occasionally. He has an extensive background working in the Grand Challenge area. Over the past 25 years, his work has crossed the public and private sectors, including working with the UN, such as the FAO, governments, universities, and assorted NGOs, non-governmental organizations. A majority of that time has been spent abroad, including Eastern and Southern Africa. Nick currently serves as the faculty chair for Global Grand Challenges and managing director of the Global Solutions Program at Singularity University. It's an innovative Silicon Valley-based program. And join me in welcoming Nick, please. And I do just want to say a few words about Tomás Díaz de la Rubia, who we have introduced earlier, but I want to make sure that everybody knows who we have with us today. Tomás, who will be moderating this panel, assumed the role of chief scientist and executive director of Discovery Park in August 2015. Before coming to Purdue, he served as an innovation leader and director for Deloitte, and the chief research officer and deputy lab director at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in California. He has published over 150 peer-reviewed articles and works closely with the faculty and deans at Purdue to help build on our legacy of interdisciplinary research, making him a perfect fit for this panel. And we're very grateful for him to take time out of his schedule to chair this panel for us today. So please join me in welcoming Tomás and all of our panelists. Take it away, Tomás.
Thank you very much. Great welcome, everybody, to the first panel. Great to have these very distinguished panelists with us. So, with those introductions in hand, let's jump into the topic. Let's talk about interdisciplinary research and grand challenges and how we converge all of these things to find solutions to these wicked problems that we face. So let me start with you, Arden. You have, as Laurel mentioned, tremendous experience throughout your career working in government, in industry, in academia. and particularly also, leading the National Science Foundation. So you have seen a lot of this before. What is new today? What from your experience can you tell us that, lays out new opportunities and new challenges for us going forward?
Okay, Tomás. When I first went to the National Science Foundation in 2003, there were a number of large centers that were supposed to be doing interdisciplinary research. But by and large, they were doing multidisciplinary research. And so we had to think hard about what's the difference between multidisciplinary research and interdisciplinary research. And the difference is simply that in interdisciplinary research, you have to have a sufficient number of graduate students and faculty who have experience in working in more than one discipline in order to provide the bridges between the disciplines and in order to make it truly disciplinary. And before I arrived at the foundation, that was already recognized. And so they started the IGERT program, which most of you know about. And the IGERT program was our enzyme to break down the silos and to support graduate research at the nebular interfaces among the various disciplines and to turn out graduate students that actually had experience in working in more than one discipline. And during my tenure at NSF, we tried very hard and succeeded. We got increases in our budget. And we doubled the size of the IGERT program and the number of IGERT grants. In fact, I think we more than doubled the number because we felt that was very important because these would be future faculty members, many of them. The other problem we faced was that we were receiving excellent proposals for Grand Challenge research, interdisciplinary research on Grand Challenge problems. But these were not solicited. They came in as unsolicited grants. And we didn't quite know what to do with them because, as you know, the foundation is organized according to discipline. The directorates are disciplinary directorates for the most part. And of course, to fund one of these large grants, you'd have to be able to take funding from various directorates. So I had to teach our assistant directors to become schizophrenic. They not only had to look after their field, but they had to look out for the foundation and the programs that the foundation wanted to support. And when it came to interdisciplinary research on Grand Challenge problems, this is what I asked them to do, and they responded. But the problem next was, how do you provide merit review when all the merit review panels are disciplinary panels? So we had to find a way to do that. But since these proposals were coming in one at a time, it wasn't cost effective to put together a panel for merit review. You had to do it by mail review. And mail review is as slow as the slowest responder. And so that was holding up the problem. So I said, all right, folks, look, we're going to do joint solicitations. These will go out by the directors coming together to develop the solicitation. And that way we'll get all the proposals in at one time and we'll be able to merit review them with interdisciplinary panels at one time. Fine, so everyone agreed with that. And especially we wanted to build up the integration or the convergence between the social and behavioral sciences and economic sciences with the physical sciences. And so the first solicitation went out, and the proposals we got in were pretty dismal. And that was because the universities were having a hard time getting the social and behavioral scientists to participate, and they didn't understand why. Well, it became obvious to me. Almost every faculty member is devoting all their time to building the foundations of their research and the foundations of their discipline. And there's very little interest in trying to solve someone else's problem that they didn't have any involvement with. It's a hard way to get promotion and tenure. So we changed the name of the game and required that the problem definition had to be the first part of the grant. And they had to define the problem with all the participants playing in the game so that each discipline would be able to see their contribution in the research. And things got a lot better. So that was sort of the beginning of these grants. The interest was there. The transition between multidisciplinary to interdisciplinary research had already started. It was a matter of how do you bring in interdisciplinary approaches for doing grand challenge problems. And so that had it started about that time, during that 6-year period. The other thing we had to do was recognize that to solve these problems at the systemic level required a lot of computational capacity, especially if you're dealing with big data. And you had to have big data tools. And I like to think of it in terms of my early mineral engineering experience at Colorado School of Mines. You start out with dirt. That's data. You know, that's the common ore. And somehow you have to figure out how to get the nuggets out of the ore. And so that takes rather sophisticated network theory and a lot of other techniques in order to do that. And so those were the tools that had to be developed. But also teraflop computing wasn't necessarily adequate because a lot of people who use high-end computing tend to be a little lazy. If you give them the capacity, they'll use the capacity, but they won't optimize their algorithms, they won't optimize their software to do it efficiently. And they all have to go through competition for the use of the computer time. And so they were crowding out other investigators. Well, one solution was, of course, let's go from teraflop to petaflop. So we agreed to do that. And the other was, let's clean up our act as far as a merit review of these various proposals and ensure that they're using the best possible methodology and the best possible computational techniques to use that capacity efficiently. So we built up the computational program, but we also built up the networking program so other universities could play. It wasn't just the big centers, it was everyone. So that's pretty much the main things that happened during my time at NSF.
That's great. Well, thank you for those insights. You know, Barbara, when we think as, you know, researchers and investigators about the work that we do, sometimes, you know, we sort of forget to think about the impact and how to communicate that impact, not only to society, but also to stakeholders on Capitol Hill, in the government, and in other places. You and the National Academies are doing a lot to help, you know, with the communication of science and research and the humanities. Can you tell us a little bit about your insights and how can we better learn to communicate around these grand challenges and the importance of this type of work?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. And those of you who can join us later this afternoon, you're going to hear from me for a whole hour. So I will give you a little bit of what we're going to talk about this afternoon, not give you a whole lot of details. But we work very hard to communicate the interdisciplinary research that we do at the academies. Our panels, most of our panels include social scientists. In fact, I was telling Laurel earlier that we consider the social science science. So as part of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, social science is part of that other S. I think maybe that's helpful in getting the interdisciplinarity of our research put together. But one of the things that we try to do is be holistic about this. And when we have enough resources, and those of you who know me, I'm a practitioner, I'm not a researcher, and so I'm on the ground trying to get this communication done every day. When we have the resources, we start out the whole project with audience research. And so communication is also a science, as many of you know. And so we collaborate with social scientists to conduct research on the audiences who we are targeting. Starting out with a holistic view of what we're trying to accomplish, which is what you just talked about as well. So once we know what we're trying to accomplish, what kind of impacts we want to make, and I'll talk more this afternoon about those impacts, we really get to know our audiences. And particularly in the sticky kinds of communication issues, we're now getting started on a big project on gene editing. We do a lot of work on climate change. We do work on nuclear power. These are all issues where the facts don't really matter all that much if you have a certain worldview. And so we really need to use the research in the social sciences, both what's in the literature to get you started, but then also to use the tools of social science to better understand your audiences and where they're coming from. Because communication is not about a one-way directional communication. It's not really you taking, oh, I have this to share, and now I want you to have it. We need to figure out what is in that person's head. In fact, sometimes people talk about the hard sciences and the soft sciences. Well, I say the soft sciences are not the social sciences. They are the really hard sciences. Because you really have to figure out what's in people's heads. You can't go into a lab and start to change things. So we really look at this in a holistic approach. We're looking at messages, we're testing messages, we get to the product, how do people want to consume this information? And you'll have stakeholder groups as you go through your work who want to receive messages through Twitter. They want 140 characters, and then they'll go and dig deeper. There are other people who will want traditional ways of hearing from you. And then, of course, you get to evaluation. Have you actually completed what you said you were going to do? And then you have to figure out what kinds of resources you have. So this really needs to start as you are thinking about your research, because what you decide to even research could depend on what your stakeholder audience wants to know about.
That's terrific. Thank you very much, Barbara. Nick, let me turn over to you. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can, and it's
Great.
a delight to be with you.
Terrific. Well, thank you for being with us via Skype this afternoon. You're at Singularity University out in the heart of Silicon Valley. And, you out there are doing a lot of really interesting work in helping educate young entrepreneurs, corporate leaders, and many others around the importance of, convergent research and grand challenges. Can you tell us a little bit about the approach that you take, to grand challenge research and your insights from looking at this from the Singularity University perspective?
Sure. So as you noted, the emphasis of Singularity University is not so much on the research side of things, but on the educating, empowering, and inspiring leaders to solve the world's biggest challenges. And we do work with corporations, we work with entrepreneurs, and the basic premise of our university is that technology is growing at exponential rates, and particularly when technology becomes an information-based technology, it's subject to what one of our founders, Ray Kurzweil, refers to as the law of accelerating returns, meaning its price point is plummeting, its capacity is doubling effectively every year, and humanity's not ready for that. Humanity's not ready for that in terms of the social implications, the broad societal implications, and humanity's not ready for that in terms of the opportunity that provides to solve the world's biggest challenges. Meaning we have incredibly powerful new tools at our disposal to end hunger, to make sure there's clean water for everybody, to make sure everyone is secure, has access to education, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the mindset that we encourage all of the people who go through our programs to embody. It's truly a mindset shift. So the word, when you use interdisciplinary, we use the word convergence, and it's effectively the same thing. And I like the comment that the previous panel mentioned that this is not multidisciplinary, it's actually the integration of all of these. So we're interested, for example, on how nanotechnology, where nanotechnology is going to go in the next 5-10 years, and how that will intersect with digital biology. how that will intersect with other exponential technologies, and how that will intersect with the social trends and social sciences as well. One thing in particular that we're very interested in is what implications does, because these technologies have such profound implications for all people around the world, we need to, if you will, up our game in terms of empathy and understanding communities around the world. And that requires pulling out every social science tool that we have to better understand the processes, the perspectives, the cultures of different communities around the world. So integrating with social science is an inherent need when one tries to apply exponential technology to solving the world's biggest challenges. And maybe on the second pass, I'm happy to give you examples of that, and also to raise a big issue that our society is facing at this particular moment in history that I think social science needs to weigh in and integrate with the technical sciences in a very meaningful manner.
Great, thank you, Nick. We'll come back then around to you in a little bit on those topics. But Arden, let me pick up on a couple of the comments that Nick just made regarding both the exponential trends in technology evolution that we're experiencing today, particularly when it comes to digital technologies. We talked about this at lunch a little bit. You know, data and computing, you mentioned already high-performance computing, but also in terms of convergence. You know, there are a lot of reports that have been written about today around the topic of convergence and the future of various, you know, key topics in society like the health sciences or energy, transportation, you know, manufacturing, et cetera. Could you comment from your perspective on how you see these exponentially advancing technologies, data, digital technologies, and convergence all coming together?
Yes. Let me start with education, since we're talking about the university, Singularity University. Instructional-based learning is not as effective and will become less effective in the future. Just pouring in knowledge is not where it's at. It's got to involve more self-learning, activity-based learning, and peer learning. And peer learning requires team building. The kind of problems that we're going to be dealing with the ever-accelerating pace of technology are going to require convergence, as was mentioned, not only looking at the technical factors, but the social factors and the economic factors and the political factors. Now, some might argue, well, political science is a behavioral science. It might also be a misbehavioral science. So you have to sort that out. So these large challenge problems are wicked problems primarily because of their complexity. But also, it's not just that you have these interconnections within a given problem set. There are also connections among grand challenge problems. For example, one can't deal with sustainable energy unless you provide a sustainable environment and also do it with a sustainable economy. And all three of those are linked. And you can do the same analysis with food security and biodiversity and so forth and find all the connections with other grand challenge problems. So that's why they're wicked problems. If you're going to bring the social behavioral sciences and the physical sciences together and converge them, you also have to converge analytics if you're ever going to get beyond arm waving and modeling the problem. First of all, defining the problem, designing the experiments, and actually carrying out the experiments. But the social behavioral sciences work in the world of statistics for the most part. PDFs, that has nothing to do with a compression file. Those are probabilistic distribution functions. And understanding the sources of both internal and external bias, confidence levels, emergent behavior, chaotic behavior. Whereas in the physical sciences, they work with deterministic mathematics. partial differential equations, linear algebra, integral equations, wavelets. So the question is, how do you bring these together in combination? Well, it just turns out that one of the centers of excellence in the world in combinatorial analytics is right here at Purdue University, and it's in the computer science department. And you have members of the faculty who are doing combinatorial analytics on entropic problems, entropic behavior. One of them, Wojciech Spankowski, is recognized as one of the world's leaders in this field. And there's a center called the Center of Science of Information, and if I can use a pun, I think this group ought to get cozy with this center. So these are ways of developing impact in studying these types of problems. There are other ways which we can get into perhaps later in the discussion. So I think I'll stop there.
All right. Well, very good. Thanks, Barbara. Let me come back to you on the topic of communication from a practical perspective. You mentioned that before. Can you give us your thoughts on how can teams, interdisciplinary teams of researchers on these grand challenge topics build communications plans into their activities so that the results, the ideas, the solutions get out and have an impact on all the constituencies, on all the stakeholders?
Well, I want to talk a little bit about some of the mistakes that people make when they think about communicating, and it all comes back to a communication plan. But for example, as we're talking about complexity, depending on who you want to communicate with, if you want to communicate with your peers, then complexity is fine. If you have an issue that you're dealing with that affects society, affects communities, affects individuals, all of you have the curse of knowledge. And that's something that is in the book Made to Stick by, I think, I'm trying to remember who. Anyway, it's in the book Made to Stick, look it up. But the curse of knowledge really, I also have it, we all have it. And so you need to realize that as you're communicating with stakeholders who aren't your peers, that you need to be simple. You need to take what you are trying to communicate and reduce it by about a factor of 10. So on the ground, practical, we have ambassadors in a pilot program in Pittsburgh called the Science and Engineering Ambassadors Program. The goal of that program is to get science and engineering into community decision-making by pulling scientists and engineers who want to come out of their lab, and provide them with communication training. And when we were first getting this off the ground, I was on the ground in Pittsburgh a lot and working on those training programs. And I have to tell you, it showed me a lot about the curse of knowledge and just getting people to give presentations that were right, even for opinion leaders. We're not going to the public here. We're going to opinion leaders in these communities to try to get better community decision making. It's very difficult to do. The other thing that many scientists and others mistakes that they make is that they tend to blame the disconnect in communication on the audience, rather than thinking about being more critical of ourselves and figuring out, yes, we have the curse of knowledge, and learning more about our audiences. So those are the two of the major things that we need to think about as experts, whether you're a humanist, whether you're a social scientist or a natural scientist, as we move forward.
Thank you. Nick, you teased us before when you mentioned that you wanted to talk about a big issue that faces society, where you think that the social sciences and other disciplines, have a lot to say going forward. Can you go back to that thought and tell us a little bit more about what you're thinking?
Sure. And the basic premise is our world is being digitized and thus codified. Algorithms are being created to make decisions on almost every aspect of our life and will be increasingly do so. in terms of developing artificial intelligence. The question is, who programs the artificial intelligence and what ethics are they guided by? What social systems understanding are they guided by? In fact, I think just a couple days ago, a very fascinating book was just published by a woman named Cathy O'Neill, which, let me see actually if I might be able to pull up the name of the book, is Weapons of Mass Destruction. And basically her premise on this is that in as much as that issues of poverty and racism are being codified by our algorithms today, because the people who are making the algorithms are not using social science to do so. And they're further exasperating inequality. Now extend that out even further. One of the bigger questions that the likes of Nick Bostrom has raised at Oxford is, how are we going to interface with artificial intelligence? The likes of Stephen Hawking, Bill Gates have said very clearly, even Elon Musk, one of the leading starlights of technology here in the Valley, has said artificial intelligence poses a very grave threat to humanity. Well, does that have to be so? Because number one, we're not going to be able to stop the increasing prevalence of artificial intelligence in our lives. So in order for it not to be so, we need to engage social scientists in the actual codifying the algorithms that we want to help guide our water systems, guide our insurance systems, guide everything in our life right now, which is being increasingly taken over by digital systems. So in fact, we need to engage social scientists like we never have before, because the implications are tremendous. And if we don't, then we're going to be leaving the future of codifying our algorithms to people who are computer scientists. Do we want someone who is purely a computer scientist, not integrating with social sciences, actually codifying our future? I don't think so. I think we need a full-on cooperation for us to have to create the future that we all want to live in.
That's terrific, Nick. I couldn't agree with you more. Those are very, very insightful remarks. The need to engage social sciences as never before because of these emerging trends in digitization. So Arden, the fact is that you mentioned it before. I mean, the agencies in the federal government that support a lot of the research that we all do very often still look at things in a single discipline mode, right? And you did make a lot of progress at the National Science Foundation, but other agencies important in this realm, and I won't mention any, but you know which ones they are not necessarily doing that. What do we need to do? What can we do to help influence, the federal government, the federal agencies, to think about convergence in a convergent way, to really think about funding work in this way that the Mellon Foundation is doing, but more broadly across all the agencies in the federal government?
Well, one approach is to scare the hell out of them. First of all, we've been used to using von Neumann architectures for computation for many, many years. But on the streets before long will be synaptic computing, which will be brain-inspired, which will allow providing more effective bridges between human intelligence and machine intelligence. Now, what that may mean is that looking ahead, and here I'm bringing in context, because context has both a spatial and a temporal component. The spatial component is that what works locally may not work, regionally may not work, nationally may not work, globally. The temporal component is what worked in the past may not work today and may not work in the future. So that the technology that we're now evolving will make the world probably more wonderful by 2030. It will also make it more wicked and more scary by 2030, and that's the devil's bargain. You can't have one without the other. The question is, how are you going to manage that? How are you going to cope with it? How are you going to do it on a global basis? Well, you've got to bring in the social and the behavioral sciences to work with the technologists to figure that out. And all the departments have to understand that. Now, I've been through, by virtue of working with the academies, studies for Homeland Security, Defense Department, Department of Energy, and NASA just in the last 4 years. And I've looked at their strategic plans, and they're all output-based, which is sort of the world of the academics. The academics build their resumes around outputs. Number of papers published, numbers of books written, number of patents awarded, number of graduate students supervised, all outputs. The question is, where are the outcomes? You know, well, how do you convert an output to an outcome? Well, it's very simple. You have to find an answer to the question, if I succeed beyond my wildest imagination, what difference will it make? And if you can define the difference, you can define the outcome. But if you answer that question, you also get two more questions. How long will it take and how much will it cost? And that's where the economics come in. So you have to cope with those kind of problems. I think language, I want to dwell on language just for a moment, because language has been pretty distorted in Washington these days. And one thing I just wanted to mention as an anecdote, I've been to a number of international conferences where some of the best scientists in the world have come together to talk about their work or to engage in a workshop looking at how theory connects with experiment. And they get into these harangues. And you get a physicist debating with a chemist about, you know, what the theory really tells you about experimental work. And it takes someone who's got an interdisciplinary understanding of the jargon in both fields, both physics and chemistry, to point out to them that their argument is aligned. They're talking about the same thing, but they don't understand that because they talk in terms of different jargon and they don't understand each other's jargon.
You know, the curse of knowledge.
Curse of knowledge. So it's not
They
just.
think we all know what they're talking about.
So it's not just communicating with the general public. In many cases, it's also communicating among the scientists. And that's going to be an issue between social and behavioral scientists and also with physical scientists because they talk in terms of different language. So in terms of improving the impact of what we do and the impact of what we design, and especially in doing grand challenge problems, it's important right from the onset to use some rigor in terms of design of experiments, in terms of doing some road mapping and identifying some benchmarks along the way, and putting in some midterm examinations to test what it is you're doing, test your models, find ground truth, do some V&V, validation and verification, and also build in some off-ramps because you may want to take a go, no-go out ramp. You either met the exam or you didn't meet the exam, so you have to start all over again. We very rarely do that, especially in working with these very complex problems. We sort of go along in an existential way and hope that we learn something that will tell us as we go along where we're going. And that happens also. But I think building in the analytics, building in the rigor is going to be very important. And we have to teach that in the federal government as well, because they're spending the money. They're not necessarily spending it wisely. They're doing a lot of things that I think could be honestly criticized because they don't do it with the rigor and with the impact that's essential. Enough of that.
No, so on that topic, following up on that very topic, Barbara, you know, the National Academies has written some reports on convergence and has been a leader in sort of, you know, laying out for the community the future of convergence. How are you communicating that with the federal government, with Congress, with administration, and what progress are you making in helping those stakeholders move in this direction?
Yeah, we had a study or a workshop on convergence. I think Phil Sharp was the head of that. Were you involved in that?
No, but there have been some really interesting reports.
Really?
Susan Hockfield and Phil Sharp and company.
Very interesting.
Yeah, very good.
And we have a whole division that works on the Hill, and many of you may know that we are a non-advocacy organization, non-profit, non-government. We're a lot of nons. But we do go on the Hill all the time. There are 4 people in that office who go on the Hill and provide information because, our mission is to make a difference in the world based on evidence-based decisions and facilitating those kinds of decisions. So it takes year-round, 24/7 effort, particularly on the Hill. I mean, that's all about relationships. So we're building relationships with people who can use this information. On the convergence side of things, we also have a major award that was funded this past year for convergence research. And it has a pretty high financial reward with it. So we're really trying to not only look at convergence overall and report out to the stakeholders, whether it's Congress, whether it's business leaders, whether it's academics, but also to try to facilitate this kind of research through those kinds of awards.
That's terrific. That's great to hear. Nick, let me turn over to you, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions from our panelists. But one last question from me, Nick, and it's about advice from your perspective. In this age of exponential rates of technology evolution, technology is becoming, as you often say at Singularity University, democratized. Is very often becoming demonetized. And those trends are making it more and more available to anybody and everybody around the world. That's all very good, but it also implies a certain degree of competitiveness that was not necessarily there before. How do you see this from your perspective? What can research universities like Purdue do better to keep bringing those advances, to bring about this convergence around these grand challenges and social issues, and to keep bringing these solutions to society globally around the world?
So yeah, it's a fascinating question. So again, with the premise that technology is changing at exponential rates and there's no man or woman behind the curtain who can put the brakes on it, just as much as technology is disrupting a number of different industries right now, we can expect technology to disrupt our very social systems that we have grown accustomed to over the last hundreds, if not thousands of years. So for any institution interested in solving global grand challenges, you need to solve challenges that you anticipate will be existing 5-10 years from now. And the problem that many innovators and researchers do is they tend to focus on today's problems with the framing of today's parameters of technological capacity, today's governance systems, today's economy, et cetera. And what we really need to do is anticipate where things are going to go 5-10 years from now and do research for that. And there's a phrase that's oftentimes thrown out there, learn from the past, otherwise something along the lines of you're doomed to repeat the mistakes of history if you don't learn from the past. Well, that may be true, but we're doomed if we don't actually anticipate what's going to happen 5-10 years from now in terms of social systems, in terms of governance and economics. Those very systems are at stake of being changed dramatically by exponential technology, again, whether we like it or not. Things like blockchain, for example, are posing whole new opportunities and perhaps disruptions to our economic systems and to our governance systems. One of the panelists mentioned a technology, CRISPR, and the ability to edit DNA in living organisms poses huge, tremendous ethical issues. We need to be anticipating where things are going to go and do the science and do the research for that. So I would say that that's one of the big challenges for any research institution, is to ensure that all of the researchers, the faculty, really adopt this exponential mindset and allow yourselves to imagine what the future is going to be and do research for that, not for today's immediate issues.
Thanks, Nick. I think we're going to start the exponential convergence series of conferences at Purdue. We'll be in touch with you. You know, with that, let me open it up to the audience. I think this is a fascinating dialogue that we're having, and I'm sure many of you have questions from our panelists that you'd like to ask. So please. One second.
So before you talk, please get this.
So, is there any meaning to the notion of policy at this time, or even at any other time? Because even in a finite game like chess with two players, Max Wu showed with the most sequence that you could have infinite games with no repetition of sequences of moves before the Chess Federation sort of changed the rules to make it a draw. But you have all of these ideas saying, if you follow this set of guidelines, you're actually going to get these results. Aren't these just empty hopes? Because it is a game which is fast-moving, and as lots of things are going exponentially, which means it's going to be even more fast-moving. You've got lots of players, and in the social sciences and economics, I guess people think of equilibriums, Nash equilibria and the like, but nobody until recent times really considered the problem of whether you really have any convergence to equilibria, and the result is we don't have any convergence to such equilibria. So why think of policy? Why not think in terms of decision-making capacity and playing the games as it is?
Who would you like to direct that question to? Anybody in particular, or all the?
Arden, I think, because he actually talked about some of these things.
All right.
And also to Nick Haan, who's talking about these.
Well, game theory and failure of the commons are two approaches. But I think you're talking about a problem that has its antecedents in culture, in religion, in social structure, and that's where the context comes in. And probably one of the most valuable things that you can learn from doing these grand challenge problems and doing it in a convergent way is to understand what the context is. But the other thing is that we're not talking about common sense. In the social behavioral sciences, we've never been talking about common sense. But in the minds of members of Congress, social science is nothing more than common sense. They don't understand the difference. So we've got to start using some nonlinear thinking, because we're in a world where emergent behavior can occur very rapidly, and almost without notice. And we have to understand how that happens and what the starting conditions are, what the beginning conditions are for emergent behavior. So those are some of the wicked problems that we have to pay attention to. And language is a very important part of it as well, because if we don't learn how better to communicate with one another and to extract common meaning, you know how many problems we can get into there as well.
Yeah, Nick, would you like to comment as well?
Well, if I heard the question correctly, what is the role of policy in an exponential era? Is that a fair way to reframe the question?
To talk about policy in exponential data.
Well, so absolutely we do need policy. Just because the exponential patterns are there doesn't mean that policy doesn't have a role. Absolutely has a role. Policy is what gives us guidance, gives us the framework to collaborate with each other across institutions, across governments, across companies, et cetera. The very nature of the way we make policy might change, because we tend to make policy with a long-term time frame in our minds, when actually, as we've been talking already, has been a theme on the panel, you could make a policy for CRISPR right now, and yet we don't even really appreciate the power of CRISPR yet. So whatever policy is put out on CRISPR being this gene editing approach, that policy needs to be ready to be iterated on and redeveloped in a very rapid manner. Policy doesn't have the long-term staying power that it used to have. And furthermore, along with the broad tendency of technology empowering individuals around the world, I think the very way we make policy needs to be decentralized much more as well, so that people around the world can stakeholders can truly be active in policy formation. And we have the tools increasingly to make that happen. And I think we need to shake off and reevaluate the way we've made policy in the past. Who makes those policies? What are those institutions? What are their power interests? What are the power dynamics? Versus the future that we're going into. The future that we're going into is individuals around the world will be empowered to, not only do they have a stake in these policies, but they'll be empowered to weigh in on them. So I guess to summarize, the way that we make policies, I think, is going to change, and the time frame or flexibility or the frequency of iteration of policies needs to be, we need to build that, encode that right into the policy itself.
Go ahead, Arden.
Well, I think we've been talking about much the same thing. I would like to add that the one thing you can do at a national level is norm. You can't innovate at the national level because of contextual variation. You have to decentralize to do innovative policy making, and also to test and evaluate policy making. By and large, what you do at the national level is raise society to the highest level of mediocrity. And that's not what I think we're really aiming at.
There's a question about, yeah.
So this is
could
a
you
question.
identify yourself, please?
Yes, I'm Pat Bowling in political science here at Purdue. This is a question that comes a little bit from your comment about the physicist and the chemist who are talking past each other because they're using their own jargon, but I think it's also appropriate to ask of all of you, particularly Barbara. A lot of us have been trained in disciplines, and now we're being encouraged by you and others, okay, learn how to think about wicked problems. You can only really effectively address them if you can talk across disciplines, in an interdisciplinary way. Can you give us some concrete suggestions about how better to do that?
You want some tips?
Well, that's the whole point of today, right?
Right, that's
but,
exactly right.
You know, I'm trying to distill what
Right.
you've been talking about for the last 20 minutes.
I think that in teams that collaborate well, and there's a lot of research on teams. In fact, we just came out with a report on the science of team science, so you might have a look at that. In teams that are operating incredibly well, you will feel comfortable telling your colleague, I don't know what you're talking about. So it's really, you know, in that kind of collaboration, you're able to be checking each other about your understanding of the language. Also, the ambassadors that we work with in Pittsburgh, we thought we needed to tread a little lightly on them and not blast through their PowerPoints and say, okay, not this one, that one, I don't know what you're talking about, but you know what, they love that. But it took time for the trust between the staff, myself, as well as the scientists and engineers to feel comfortable enough to have those kinds of conversations. But I think as you're working on these projects together, understanding the dynamics of teams and feeling safe within those teams, and that's really the number one criteria for a team that is succeeding and is producing, is that kind of safety within the team. So building those kinds of teams and using the social science of teams to do that would be really helpful.
Other questions from the audience? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Valeria Sinclair Chapman, and I'm in the political science department. And I was struck by Nick's comment about weapons of math destruction, which is a marvelous title, but also a really intriguing idea. And I suppose that I'm thinking of a historian, Anne Scott. She was president of the American Historical Association, and she gave an address in 1984 called On Seeing and Not Seeing. And the point of her address is that scholars have been doing history for decades, centuries even, and history was mostly about conquest and men in politics, right? So women were completely invisible. And part of what happened when she started doing her work is she started to notice what women were doing in politics. And so when you talked about the inequality in algorithms, right? I'm wondering, are you suggesting that that social scientists can contribute to addressing what is likely unconscious bias, right? Because math is a so-called universal language, right? Or are you suggesting that we have to change the people in the seats, which is mostly what I think Silicon Valley is saying, that you need more women and people of color in those seats doing the work? And if that's the case, then that's really a 2-decade kind of generational problem, right, to get to that level of change. So I'm wondering how we can address that kind of unconscious bias, either through the social sciences, or is it a mix of approaches where you change the people in the seats as well? How do you do all of those things?
I would say all of the above. Some are a longer term approach, that would be your latter one, and then the former one is things we can do right now. We need social scientists, computer programmers, roboticists working together to create systems that we as humanity find are just, are fair, and allow us to reach our full potential. We're at great risk right now of further codifying and exasperating inequality, racism, and the like, because the people who are writing these algorithms are using basic math and taking the data that they have available to them and codifying it. That's not acceptable. And that's why we're at a juncture right now where we need this convergence of this interdisciplinary approach of social scientists. And let's be clear, social science has inherent biases and racism as well. So that the solution isn't just social scientists working with computer programmers, it's actually addressing the inherent inequalities and racism and bias within our social science systems as well. But we're at let's look at this as a huge opportunity for people to have a voice in designing the future. But it requires us doing things differently, getting out of our silos. And that's why I really love this forum that you all are putting together, getting us out of our silos. And I'd take that just one step further, by the way. As much as I am a huge proponent of uncommon collaborations, if you will, uncommon collaborations of different disciplines working together, we also are at an era where any one of us as individuals have the power to go, I'm not an anthropologist, but I can learn about anthropology. I'm not a physicist, but I can learn about physics. At least enough to be knowledgeable to have a meaningful discussion with my colleagues who do have that expertise. In other words, we have to approach this in a non-passive way. We can break down those silos even within our own training, because each one of us, if any of us are like 30 years or older, we've been trained in a discipline, and we have opportunities now to break out of those silos even within our own mind. So that's the challenge for us, and I would say it's actually a big opportunity, and it's a huge risk if we do not get this right. And we're not talking something theoretical or something long off. This needs to be sorted in the next 5 or 10 years.
I think Nick has just thrown out a tremendous challenge, a very important challenge to an academic institution like Purdue. And going back to something Arden said before, it's all about education. So how do we ourselves think about educating the next generation in this convergence so that, they naturally just work outside a single silo? That is the challenge that I think we all face also as an academic institution, as a university, a very, very important one. And I do believe that very strongly that, as industries are being disrupted out of business because of the kinds of things that we talked about here at the table today, as areas of society are being disrupted. Academia is also being disrupted. And I think those academic institutions that are able to embrace and take advantage of this convergence are the ones that are going to be the ones that have the impact in society in the future. So I think with those thoughts, I'd like to thank our panelists and the audience. A great, fascinating panel. I want to do this, every month, Laurel. Okay. Jim, you have...
If I could. Jim Mullins, the Dean of Libraries. And I thought the one comment that talked about working outside of the silos was a natural lead-on for me to give another push or promo for the libraries. The libraries have been working outside of our silos ever since we were conceptualized, because we're a microcosm of the university. We have scientists, we have humanists, we have social scientists inside the libraries, and they all work together. And so what we've had to do is to figure out how do we bring ourselves together and then go outside of the libraries to do this. And then I want to respond to the comment that Arden made about the scientists or the chemists and the physicists working together. When I first arrived here more than 10 years ago, and we started having conversations about data management, and Scott Brandt and I were going out and talking to people, and we were using the term metadata. And I had a computer science faculty member come to me and say, "You don't know what you're talking about. We know metadata, you don't. And you're horning in on our area." And I said, "Really? I've been a librarian for over 40 years, and no one has claimed cataloging and classification before this." And he said, "Oh, that's what you're talking about." And I said, "Yes." And I said, "We're talking about how do you describe the content and the subject within the database, not the programming that creates it." And he said, "Well, we complement each other." And I said, "Exactly." We ran into an issue when we in the libraries use the term curate. Curate means we talk about making sure the material is available and accessible. Well, I would make comments to scientists and say, "We can curate your data." And they go, "No, you can't." And I go, "Yes, we can." And they say, "No, you can't." And I couldn't figure out why they couldn't think we could do this until I found out that when they were saying curate, they were authenticating and making sure that it was reliable, which of course we couldn't do. So we had to make sure that we didn't use the term incorrectly. We actually brought in a linguistics professor here at Purdue to sit down with us to understand how we could communicate using the same term but understanding it differently. And I have a question for Arden. We were talking before lunch, or at lunch, about how English is really the language of science. I mean, of all of it's the universal language within science. But everyone doesn't know it at the same level. And so is there a problem when we write documents in English and assume that everyone has the familiarity with English to be able to understand the impact or the import of what is being said in those documents?
Very, very good question, Jim. Obviously, that's a learning issue, but it's better than the alternative. And I have to say that I have listened to Russians in Russia who have studied English, which is almost a required language. And they speak English better than I do in some respects, and they understand it better than I do in some respects. So it depends on what passion you put into the learning process, and whether you're doing it because it's required or whether you're learning it because you can't be successful without knowing it. And if it's the latter, you're going to learn it.
All right, well, with that, again, thank you all very much. Perfect.